web conference, Marketing Technology 101 for Privacy Officers, sponsored today by Wirewheel. My name is Dave Cohen. I'm the IAPP's Knowledge Manager, and I'll be your host for today's program. We'll be getting started with the presentation in just a minute, but before we do, I'd like to cover a few program details. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 IAPP CPE credit. Others who are listening in can apply for those credits through an easy-to-use online form on our website. I'd also like to remind you that today's program is being recorded and will be provided free to registered attendees approximately 48 hours following the live event. At that time, the slides will also be available to you in PDF form through a download presentation link just below the recording viewing window. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during this program by typing them into the Q&A field, the right of your PowerPoint window, and your questions will be answered either in line or during a designated question and answer period just after the presentation. Now on to our program, and I would like to introduce today's panelists. Andy Dale is General Counsel and Head of Strategic Partnerships at Alice, a good friend of the IAPP and mine, and it's great to have you on the program with us. Andy, can you tell us a little bit about your role over there at Alice and also maybe some of your previous posts?
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the General Counsel and Head of Partnerships at Alice. I've been at Alice almost 9 months, and prior to that, I was the General Counsel and Head of Data Privacy at a company called SessionM that was acquired by MasterCard in 2019. And prior to that, I was the VP of Legal at an advertising tech company, and prior to that, I sat on the legal team at TD Ameritrade, working on commercial issues and privacy as well. And I'd like to be here and moderate. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And as Andy just mentioned, he's going to moderate the panel today. And joining Andy on the panel, Camille Landau is Chief Marketing Officer over at Wirewheel. Camille, it's great to have you with us. Can you tell us about your role at Wirewheel and also your professional background?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. I lead marketing at Wirewheel, which is a privacy technology company serving both marketing professionals as well as privacy professionals. Before Wirewheel, I was at a blockchain company, which introduced me to technology around privacy, as well as, of course, enforce the value of privacy. And prior, I worked in marketing for B2B and B2C companies.
Excellent. Thanks, Camille. That's fantastic. And it's good to have you with us today. And to round out our panel today, MK Gettler is Head of Marketing at Alice, a colleague of Andy's. And it's great to have you with us, MK. Can you tell us a little bit about your role over there at Alice and also how you got into the space, MK?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me on today's webinar. As Dave said, I am the Head of Marketing at Alice. That means I get to make Andy Dale a celebrity. If you haven't checked out Andy's series called Data Protection Breakfast Club, check it out. But in addition to that, I oversee all of our marketing efforts as well as our business development efforts. Before joining the team here at Alice about a year ago, I was the head of demand generation for another startup called Birdeye, where I oversaw both our marketing and demand generation efforts. And even before finding my way to Birdeye, I worked at HubSpot for about 5 years, where I worked in various roles across lots of different departments. Super excited to have been part of that journey pre and post IPO with the team at HubSpot. And I'm excited for today's conversation.
Excellent. Well, it's going to be a great conversation. We're really looking forward to it. So without taking up any more time, let's go ahead and get started. And for that, I'm going to turn the controls over to Andy. Andy, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dave. We're here to talk about marketing technology for privacy officers. This is a really interesting space because, in my view, marketing and advertising are responsible for many of the privacy rules and regulations and underpin much of current privacy law today. A lot of it started with the advertising and marketing world, and we've seen over the years increased regulation, as we know, the GDPR, CCPA, state laws, and such all kind of converge and proliferate, and many of those rules and laws have significant impact on the marketer's job. And so we're here to talk a little bit about that today. And the first image I chose here is the social dilemma. And I don't know if everybody has seen this, but it's sort of a documentary on Netflix. It's drama, but rooted in truth. going deep into social networks and the way they utilize data for advertising purposes. And I just thought it was sort of emblematic of kind of where we are today in the world. And a marketer has to balance all of the tools that they're going to deploy and utilize all of the data at their fingertips, but they more and more have to be really attentive to their brand and their brand's reputation. And the more and more data they're utilizing and the ways in which they're utilizing that data is becomes subject to scrutiny, becomes subject to privacy laws. And so that's required the marketer to work much more closely with the privacy and legal team in the past 10 years than they really ever have. And from the lawyer and the privacy team side, it requires the lawyer to act much more as product counsel, in my experience. And that actually, product counsel is a role that has emerged in, I'd say, the last 10 years that didn't really exist when I started practicing in-house, and that's now a thing. And in serving in that capacity is really, really, excuse me, an important role. It may be in some ways the most important role that the in-house lawyer plays at a tech company, especially when you're in a smaller company. Your job is to balance the products and features that are being built and not be constantly saying no or be a blocker. And I think it's become a critical relationship to establish between that lawyer and the marketer. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because I'm lucky enough to have my head of marketing on this call today to talk through some of those things. And just by way of history, to go back just a little bit, life used to be a lot simpler in the advertising and marketing sort of privacy world. Advertising was driven by cookies, and marketing was sort of more driven by outbound messaging, just marketing your business. But both market forces and privacy regulation have forced those tactics to change. Marketing in particular shifted from an outbound sort of motion to an inbound motion, and MK can speak about this perfectly because she came from HubSpot, which is the innovator of inbound marketing. And on the advertising side, we're seeing a lot of pressure on browser cookies. Traditional advertising technology leveraged browser cookies, device-level data, and now, interestingly, with all the privacy and regulation that we've seen, there's been a greater shift towards first-party data. If cookies are third-party data and device-level data, first-party data about an individual. And so we've seen that shift take hold. Before I go on and talk a little bit about inbound, Dave, maybe we want to do the poll, and we can get a sense before we tee up MK to talk. We want to get a sense from everybody, if you could, on your sort of level of marketing terms and jargon, and that way we can tailor the Q&A in particular to do that. And so marketing moved towards more of an inbound motion, which is creating content. MK mentioned the show we created, but it's also written content, white papers, and any sort of content designed to pull someone inbound into your organization. And that took hold, and that requires the creation of content, obviously, but also the processing of a large amount of first-party data. And that means more personal information, more privacy challenges. Dave, how do we close the poll? Can we close it? Thanks.
Hey.
And I'm going to pass this on to MK, and I wanted to highlight, now that we have this new world that we're living in, how does the marketer then create a tech stack? And MK has a unique perspective on this, taking over the head of marketing role at Alice and having to assess her tech stack and decide how she's going to build it, and we'll start there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy, so much for the transition there. And I think to your point about inbound marketing versus outbound marketing, most marketers are going to find themselves in a position where they are either on the precipice of or already experiencing what I call tech bloat. Now, again, this is more of an MK-ism than it is actually a standard terminology for the marketing field. But what I mean by tech bloat is that as they're trying to solve those core business problems, marketers are prone, they are wont to add technology in as the solution, especially when marketers are trying to balance both their outbound marketing and inbound marketing motions. It becomes clearly and very obvious that folks are using technology to help build better efficiency in their processes. And as the space has evolved, what's really interesting is that today, at this point in time, we have 8,000 solutions available as marketers alone. This visual that we're seeing here is actually the entire marketing technology landscape. And just in social media alone, there are 1,969 individual tools that a marketer can use to be able to grow their content distribution strategy through social media. To Andy's point about the content creation for inbound marketing, 1,926 tools exist for content creators. Sales technology or sales enablement technology that marketers are starting to own more and more, 1,314 different tools. And as we even go down into ad tech, 922, which means that underneath it all, marketers are trying to triangulate all of the respective data points for their customer journey across all of these solutions, which of course then opens up new opportunity and new fields for 1,258 different data tools for these platforms. So as you look at a marketer's world today, all of these point solutions solve individual problems, but you still need one tool to rule them all. And being able to wrangle and maintain data and data accuracy is probably one of the most difficult parts of any marketer's job today. It makes the tools that they use the backbone of a company. And how well architected that data structure is will end up making or breaking how efficient or inefficient a marketer is. I saw that someone has asked about a few examples of the tools in these categories, but if we're looking at social media, you can think of Hootsuite has been around for quite some time. Sprout Social is another tool. If you think about content, you think about content management systems. One of the most traditionally used one is WordPress, but I mentioned I'm a former HubSpot employee, but HubSpot would technically be considered both a content and now a sales tool. They even have some ad tech in there. So what's happening is now a lot of these tools are starting to have feature creep where they're adding in new features, new functionality, and or expanding into new categories. This makes a marketer's job really difficult to keep the data integrity and keep the footprint of their prospects and or customers as clean as possible. What I also think is interesting too is when you think about selecting the right technology and partnering with the members of your data compliance and your privacy teams in-house, the underlying thing that you are trying to preserve is operational alignment and good data integrity and hygiene. When it comes into explicitly opting into your marketing initiatives and campaign, your marketing team needs to lean and rely very heavily on their legal and or compliance teams to make sure that they're following all the right protocol, they're following all the right procedures, and that all 8,000 of the tools that I talked about in this slide are speaking to each other and have just the right amount of data integrity across these platforms. The visual that we're looking at here, this is actually how I've architected Alice's account-based programming, such that ICP, which is another marketing jargon term, it's our ideal customer or client profile. Marketing's job that's featured here in yellow is to find that target account list and further qualify those accounts to be able to facilitate a conversation. And then we hand that over to business development. And in the marketing organization here at Alice, we do have marketing and business development sitting under one organization. But for many businesses, that's another organization, which means yet another pool of data and another group of folks using that data. Then we typically hand that on over to sales. In our definition, we call them sales qualified accounts or sales qualified opportunities, which ideally our sales team is closing one. But as you think about now, marketers are stretching themselves across the entire customer life cycle. We are now not just only responsible for net new acquisition, we're responsible for retaining customers as well. So thinking about increasing the lifetime value of a customer and making sure you've kept your data, all your hygiene, all of your opt-in regulations clean and tidy is becoming a really important part of what marketers are responsible for today. With that said, I see Denise has asked a question looking at some of these cloud-based ads complexity. And yeah, I think these cloud-based tools do tend to add complexity in data protection efforts. You could have an opt-in from a conversational tool like Intercom and or Drift, where someone can use a chat feature on your website to communicate with you, and you'll need to have compliance and regulation around how folks are actually opting into receiving advanced communication from you and your organization. With that said, fortunately, I have a very tight relationship with Andy, and Andy helps me keep checks and balances in place for when I am considering adding a new piece of technology to our B2B tech stack. I've developed this repeatable routine with my team. If we ever feel as though the business problems we're identifying might require a new technology, I have them go through this process of first and foremost identifying and prioritizing the root problem of what we're trying to solve. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of technologies are actually folding in features that their competitors might have and or actually allow them to have competitive differentiation. So as you look at how you want to solve the root problem, your current tech stack could actually offer a solution. Your team may just not have known that yet. So partner with your marketers to make sure that your current technology, which you've ideally already vetted and have approved of, is actually folding in all that advanced usage. And then, of course, one of the
MK.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Can I add something to that? I think that you just made a really salient point that I want to add for the privacy folks and the lawyers here. That means that when MK and her team and the person like that in your organization, they come to you, I've found it's really helpful to talk through all of the potential use cases for a technology and to vet them all at once. And you want to use this way now, and you want to process personal information in this particular way. What else does this tool do? What are you going to use it for, and what are you going to use it for in the future when we scale? And if you start thinking about that early on, you've done that impact assessment in the right way at the right time, and you don't have to go back later. Instead, it's we're going to turn this feature on. So I just want to call that out, that's so thinking scalably.
Yeah, I love that, and that's the name of the game for marketers today is scale and efficiency. So wherever we can optimize that, the better our jobs become, the easier our jobs become. And once you've been able to evaluate that current tech stack, that technology that you have, and you have decided that introducing a new piece of technology to your tech stack is the right way to go, the key that so many folks skip over is having an implementation plan. Now, part of the implementation plan should be touching base with your legal and or compliance teams to make sure that the tool that you're using has met the standards of excellence that your organization has. But this also means that you're training people how to use the new tool so that inevitably there is going to be data input from a human somewhere along the way, but that as they add that information, they are adhering to the right procedures to make sure that we have refined the data integrity. And then, of course, like any good marketer, our job is to always analyze and optimize. These days, marketers are a lot more scientists than they are arts and crafts and creatives. And so the analysis and optimization of solving your problems and or introducing technology to help alleviate those problems is becoming the fourth and one of the most important steps in a modern day marketer's life. So these are the 4 steps we use to assess B2B technology, but now you're going to need to understand how to actually apply that technology into a sound marketing strategy. So I'm going to kick it back on over to Andy and then have Andy help guide us to the next phase of today's presentation.
Thanks, MK. Yeah, so now that you've built your tech stack, it's time for the marketing team to utilize it and look at its role and opportunity in the business. And MK talked a little bit about the tie between marketing and sales. In a SaaS business in particular, that can be a really tight-knit organization. In MK's case, working with the chief revenue officer closely. In other companies, it may function differently, but once you've built your tech stack, there's a ton of opportunity for the marketer, and I want to let Camille take that off.
Yeah, well, thank you. I love how clear MK is in describing the ways in which technology support the end goal. And I just want to resurface the end goal because it's going to help us think about partnership between, I would say, privacy and marketing. The end goal is customer lifetime value, which really boils down to how much value is our organization offering our consumer base, and how much more value might we be able to offer and be rewarded for monetarily. That has to do with fit of product. It has to do with being able to serve customer needs ongoing, deepen that relationship, et cetera. So ultimately, it is about a trusting relationship in which, as an organization, we're able to offer value and, of course, maintain trust. And I say, of course, maintain trust, but as I'm going to show in a couple of examples, that's not always the case. And I think that trust is the common language that can and should be shared between privacy and marketing. So I'm going to go into an example of a company that I do trust. I don't want to put a question around that. I want to say I do trust, despite the fact that look at the information that can be gathered from just my last order. And we don't quite have the chat function for you to tell me what you can tell about me from this order, but think it to yourselves, and then I'll share some facts, some fun facts about me that could be extrapolated just from this last Sunday's order from Instacart. Well, we can tell that where I live, when I ordered, so one could extrapolate when I was home based on some of the cold things in the order. One can see that maybe I qualify as foodie. I was ordering from a market not so near me, maybe for special reasons. There's organic food in there. There's some possibly relatively unusual foods. Maybe I was making a special recipe. And this is just from one order, and in fact just part of one order. Over time, we can see pretty simply how many people might live at my house. We might see some food ordered for a particular holiday, Jewish in my case, and extrapolate that. We might see that I have a food sensitivity or not, that I might be going on a diet. I mean, it's pretty extensive. Now, why do I feel comfortable about this? Because, and it's not that I actually read Instacart's privacy policy before I put in my order, although nerdily enough, I have read their privacy policy. It's because they earn this trust over time. There's huge value to me in this exchange. In fact, there's so much value that, and there's so much trust that I could imagine deepening the relationship further. As a consumer, I wouldn't mind if Instacart did offer to connect me to other sources of data or see other sources of data about me. What if they suggested a shopping list based on recipes I was looking on other sites or even some TV shows? What if they invited me to offer a budget and possibly do some meal planning with them? What if they offered some health guidelines for some health goals I have? All of this is possible because of the trust, okay? But now, as I go to another case, what is not possible is me interacting right now with most of the solar companies that seem to be flooding the market with sometimes not so scrupulous ads, to me, harassing phone calls, etc. I'm sure there are fantastic companies out there, but based on my personal experience so far, I've I've blocked them out of my life, and maybe to my husband's chagrin, we will not be getting solar just based on I don't want to deal with companies that harass and mistreat my data even before I enter their funnel as a prospect. So we've talked about marketing technology. Also part of our conversation is the way in which marketers' job is shifting and in some extent becoming more complicated because of changing opinions about third-party data and changing takes from big players like Google and Apple in terms of how an organization can connect its data to third-party data. What I wanted to stress, and what I really hope I'm stressing in the Instacart example, is that there is so much opportunity for an organization to deepen its relationship with customers, prospects and existing customers through first-party means. Again, the goal is increasing customer lifetime value through the increased value offered by the organization to its customers. And in this slide, I show technologies that sometimes can get us in trouble. That's in the slide in the area called technology not used, and I counter it with technology one can use to maintain a healthy first-party relationship. So customer research is critical, and customer research can be done directly with our customers through a survey, through interviews. Typically, one learns much more than from direct exchange with customers. This is as opposed to relying on approximations from Facebook. Similarly, if a goal is, which it typically is, top of funnel leads, one can get direct customer referrals as opposed to working with list brokers. You see that the spirit here is evaluating technology as to whether it helps our organization genuinely understand and serve the needs of our prospects and customers. The more we know our customers, the less reliance we'll have on third parties to essentially guess for us. And another take on what MK shared about the technology stack is a mature technology stack is one that helps us increase our ability to know and to serve our customers. So Wirewheel, as I mentioned up front, is the company I'm proud to lead marketing for. We provide marketers with technology that helps manage trust, access, and consent, and we provide privacy officers with that technology as well as the technology to help manage privacy operations internally. We are directly serving the needs of both marketers and privacy professionals and think about that connection through our product and our other efforts. I'm going to hand it back to Dave.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Kimmy and Andy and MK. That's fantastic. Great tee-off for this conversation here. I want to remind everybody out in the audience that we now have some time for audience questions and answers, so you can submit your questions in the little field that's just to the right of the slide window there, and we'll take them anonymously. Just for a little bit of clarification, I'm going to go back to you, MK, and your earlier part of the presentation when you showed that graphic with all those very many organizations involved in the space, and someone wrote in and said, how many of these organizations appear and disappear any given year? How dynamic is this map? Which is really kind of fascinating. Probably rapid comings and goings, I would think. But what do you? How would you comment on that?
100%. I think there's a couple of things to unpack in Denise's question. The first of which is that the marketing technology landscape that I showed at 8,000 is what it looks like this year. Last year, I think it was just north of 6,500 tools. And so in just a year, that amount of technology has entered the space for marketers to be able to lean into has just completely changed how dynamic the map is and continues to grow and evolve. As far as a shelf life for any given one of these technologies, I don't have a silver bullet answer for how many of these may disappear or appear in any given year, but the considerations to think of as your marketing team may grow and or evolve is one of the things Andy pointed out, which is about scale. The problems your organization is solving may change, and the complexity of that problem may change, which would force them to reevaluate the technology they would introduce into their stack. You also may find that the technology landscape, as it does evolve, we find technology aggregators. I mentioned Hootsuite as an example of this, but in a social media marketer's world, they would have to log into at least 5 different social media tools like LinkedIn, Facebook. They could be advertising on TikTok even, Twitter. And all these different platforms individually, they don't need you to log into them individually when you use an aggregator of sorts. So you could have access to all those pieces of technology and also an aggregator on top of it. I just realize that it's more efficient for your organization to scale those behaviors and outreach through those platforms. There's also another consideration too, is that when you have a new marketer join the team, especially in the more senior level of marketing, they may be more familiar with using a different technology suite. I am a former HubSpotter, but now here at Alice we use Marketo. And so I could have said, I would like to introduce a new technology. I want to go back to using HubSpot instead of Marketo because I'm familiar with building a demand gen engine and a marketing team around that tool. But I would say you're going to consider, your marketing team is going to consider switching out technology, at least 1 or 2 core pieces of technology per year. To me, I'm not sure if you have any hot takes on that as well.
No, I agree. I think that, first of all, everything's changing all the time. So the smaller players get consumed by larger, or their features become adopted by larger, or new features come up, which then change the equation. The thing to keep in mind, again, is what is the goal? If the goal is great customer experience, and how are we working backwards from that goal and working towards that goal? What are the elements of customer relationship we would like towards that goal? Then the technology should plug in. There was another question from the audience, which is how do we suggest that privacy professionals learned about the ad tech, martech space? And I think when we see the map that MK that you shared seems a little daunting. But I would say a couple things. One, don't forget that you're experiencing this whole space as a consumer. And you have your own sense of best practice just based on those experiences. And you could literally go to a best case example and work with your marketing professional to find out what technologies you think are going into it, and a worst case example, and also equally learn. Another thing you can do is some of the bigger one ring to rule them all, like HubSpot or Marketo, are really good sources to read through, as in go to their site and see what they offer, what picture they paint of an end-to-end technology stack, of course using them, but you'll get a great sense of what's available. Some of them, like Marketo, have marketplaces with plugins, and that I've found is the most current education as to what's available.
That's terrific. Thanks, Camille. Thanks, MK. You know, it strikes me that on this question, it's got to be tough for folks considering new technological tools to bring into the suite, that it's a balance between, you don't want a fly-by-night operation that you spend some money on and train up on and get everybody used to, that's not going to be around next year or the year after. So there may be some advantages there with some companies that have been around for a little bit longer. However, the new fresh faces on the block often offer some real advantages and some opportunities that are probably really attractive to people. So it's got to be a tough balance between that. So kind of building off that question, let me take this next question and start with you, Camille. It's this: would the discussion of integration with privacy solutions be part of the discussion between legal and marketing when looking at new technologies? And the way I read that is, when considering bringing on new technology, should there be, or is there typically a joint conversation between marketing and legal about what tools to bring on and whether they're going to be a good fit or not?
That's a great question. Of course, the people on this call are likely to say there should be, and maybe the people in the audience also will likely say there should be. What we often see is that with respect to compliance, which our team sees as one level of trust, but not the ultimate, with respect to compliance, Wirewheel and other peers in the space offer quick solutions to get compliant, to make sure that compliance is met, both from our consumer-facing communications and also from our internal record keeping. So that's a first step. But in terms of, and that we have seen privacy professionals or legal team members simply adopt our software as an example without consulting with marketing. But we see that as the beginning point, because compliance ultimately will be met by following the spirit of the law, not just the box checking. And the spirit of the law in the U.S. is moving more towards that of GDPR, which is there value for the consumer in this use of data? And in order to be able to respond to that, one needs to know, A, what data about the consumer is being used, and B, what value are we offering, in addition to how are we keeping track. And so those conversations would need to be not only between legal and marketing, but of course with IT as well, which is something that the deeper solutions support.
Fantastic. Thanks, Camille. Anybody else want to comment on this before we move on? Andy, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think Camille covered it pretty well. I mean, if in general, I'll say what I always say, which is the earlier you involve the legal and privacy person, the better. So if they're actually truly product counseling, then when you're evaluating tools, the evaluation of that tool comes with greater context, and it's much easier. Just handing them the agreement is too late, because they're going to come back with all those questions anyway.
Right. And Andy, just following up on that, there is a question from the audience. Do you recommend that marketers have legal vet the service agreements with these online tools? I can guess what your answer is there, but do you want to talk a little bit about that and how important that might be?
I mean, clearly I'm going to say that it's important that the lawyer review the contract, but I think more importantly than that, it's that the lawyer or privacy person or both are in the room when the discussion is being had. Because that is more of a discussion than it is anything. There's a question in here about what's your process for when you bring on new cookies, or that also is just the same type of contextual conversation that needs to happen, and you need to be a partner. You need legal and privacy to be on the requirements list that the product team has when they're evaluating features. You need legal and privacy to be on the list of not necessarily approvals, but the list of people that MK is going to brainstorm with on which tools for which tactics to bring into the fold. She's just hired a new hire on her team, and he's going to be responsible for different area of marketing for the business. And I think, I don't know this for a fact, but he just reached out to me to meet. And I think that that's MK directed, right? Like, one of the first people you're going to need to meet is the lawyer and the privacy person, because we're going to need to be, because MK is of that mindset of let's have those conversations up front so that we can get it right now and scale. Fantastic.
All right. Well, something that has been a big force within the conversation that we're having today is the recent enactment of the CCPA. Originally CCPA, now the CPRA. And so we have a question here that I'm sure a lot of folks are struggling with out there, which is how much of an impact has this had on marketing technology. What about Virginia and Washington State privacy laws? They're coming down the pike. I think the IP, just the Daily Dashboard the other day, ran a little piece about the upcoming Virginia law. Andy, let's stay with you for a minute and just have you talk about that, some reflections on how things have changed with the passing of the CPRA and maybe a little crystal ball gazing on the upcoming state laws that may actually come into play here as well, and how that's going to affect decision-making around tools and technologies here. Yeah.
Sure. Clearly the CCPA is of a big impact to everybody, not just marketing. But in particular, I'll just take it by example. In joining Alice, one of the things on my plate always is to review our privacy policy in light of the CCPA and the CPRA and the GDPR, and does it need to be refreshed? And that was a project that we embarked on. MK and I did a lot of that together, and so much of that focuses on the marketing tools. And as MK mentioned, both Camille and MK mentioned this, the particular marketing motion that your company has put into play. And so it means that you have to do a holistic review of your practices. And I think a lot of people look at the GDPR and the CCPA as different in the sense that the GDPR has a lot of, and Camille and Wirewheel know this deeply, lots of record-keeping requirements and a whole slew of software solutions required to enable record-keeping and back-end compliance. And maybe the CCPA doesn't have that, but it has different issues in dealing with this really broad definition of do not sell. And so I think the simple answer is yes, it's had a huge impact on businesses, but if I want to go a level down and talk about how to practically solve these problems, a couple things come to mind. Technology is imperative, whether it's Wirewheel or another type of tool that you may want to use. Any sort of compliance documentation system is imperative. Having a person in the organization that owns that tool and can drive it, that can be legal, privacy, that can be product. In some cases, product, you can find privacy champions in your organization that are interested and will help you drive those tools. So technology is one. You may need a cookie consent solution if you're, for instance, marketing in Europe. And a lot of people are doing that in the United States as well. That can be, I think Wirewheel offers that too, but that can be OneTrust. That can be, other companies offer these consent management tools that need to be evaluated and deployed. So technology is a critical piece. The other piece is advisors and people. I mentioned having internal privacy champions. Number one, I would say start there. Identify all of the people in the organization that are critical with data science or understand the data mapping, where data is, where it's stored, what systems are being used. The CCPA and the GDPR require you to focus in this way, where those requirements weren't really there before. So that's people, that's inside. And then the third thing is sort of outside consultants and legal counsel. And you're always trying to build your own internal capabilities and build your team to have to do that less. But there's extreme value when you deal with the complex issues. I don't need someone to tell me, well, here's what the CCPA says. What I need to hear is from my outside counsel across my customer base, my client base. Here are the things that I'm seeing, and here are the things that you need to be particularly attentive to, knowing your particular business profile. And that was incredibly valuable to us when we did our privacy policy, and I had to work with MK, and we worked with a specific outside counsel that knows our business really well and helped us sort through things, because the CCPA and the CPRA isn't enforced for a few years. We have no enforcement history for the CCPA to look at the moment, right? So we're interpreting the law, and we're putting it into practice as we go. And so I don't know if I answered the question, Dave, so much as kind of just gave my thoughts on how to approach it.
Yeah,
but I think at the end of the day, there's no one way. It's you need help to do it.
Well, That's helpful, Andy. And as a matter of fact, Andy, you just created a nice segue into another great question that I was going to queue up for you here that I think I'll start with MK. You mentioned working with MK and working with marketing is a lot of what we're talking about here is the legal department working with the marketing department. Clearly, you guys have a great working relationship. Some folks out there may be not starting off with a relationship and are thinking about building that. So, let's, again, MK, let's start here with you with this one, and then Camille, I'd love to get your thoughts as well. And the question is, as marketing tech is being evaluated, are there any tips or structures that keep the relationship between Privacy Council and marketing a partnership rather than adversarial? One could see how it could become adversarial, and that doesn't really help. So the relationship. So MK, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think the way that I look at it too is from a marketer's perspective. Andy kicked off this discussion talking about the new understanding of technology. And marketers are going to not understand the interworkings of the technology and the implications of the technology that they add to their stack. When you look at the social dilemma, many of us as consumers are just kind of going along with the shifting tides in the landscape of technology and how that's evolved our consumption of content, how that's evolved the way that we get marketed and advertised too. And right now, marketers know that most of the technology and most of the tactics they're using to drive a strategy are table stakes. Digital advertising, it's table stakes right now. What they don't understand, though, like I said, is the implication of using this kind of technology and the implication that that technology has on their compliance and regulatory issues. And so to have a symbiotic relationship between, your legal and privacy teams and your marketing team starts first and foremost with education. Marketers are going to need your help being educated and on their social responsibility of managing the data and the data flow properly and the privacy of the contacts in their contact database. So start there. Never assume that a marketer understands why this type of information, why this type of regulation is so important, and educate. Andy has been such a huge value add to give me the insights and understand where he's coming at when he's solving the problems for our organization, which makes me a better steward for helping to mitigate and or get out ahead of some of the issues he may have to work through. So educate, that's the first tip that I would have, and then reinforce in your own team. So just because I understand more of what Andy is trying to accomplish and help Alice accomplish doesn't necessarily mean that the members of my team understand and know this. And so Andy's right. I had a new hire start this week, and one of the first folks I asked him to talk to is Andy, so that he can also be educated and understand how he can be a better steward of our company's privacy and regulatory needs. So once you can start from that place of educating and elevating, I think that is a really great solid foundation to build ongoing relationship and partnership between legal and marketing.
That's terrific.
Absolutely agree.
Camille, would you like to add here?
Yeah, what I would just want to echo is, yes, there are natural tensions in an organization, and if it feels like there could be confrontation of some form between legal and marketing, I would just say that it only needs to be temporary, to MK's point about education, because marketers really want to do the right thing. And the pressure we get is that we don't exist in a vacuum. Competitors may or may not be doing the right thing. But in general, a marketing team is motivated by maintaining good relationships with customers and also with being allowed to do our job. Note to privacy professionals, marketers are maybe less familiar right now with managing third-party cookies, et cetera, and where we may or may not get into trouble or have frictions, but we are very familiar with the issue of email spam and when the case that many of us have been in where we send a blast email and then we're shut out of using systems because one of the emails was marked as not one that we're not supposed to send to for various reasons, and then our job is put on halt. That is something that nobody wants. We simply want to do our job, and I think that's a good reference point that marketers already understand.
Terrific. Thanks. Thanks for that, Camille. And Andy, over to you next. We have a couple of questions that have come in regarding consent. Obviously, it's a tricky situation, and it's a case-by-case basis. But there's been a lot of development in the requirements for consent over the past couple of years. How have you seen that evolving, Andy, and how does that come into the decision-making process with regards to marketing effort and working with legal?
It's tricky, Dave, because it depends on how you want to get consent and where and whether you actually need it. So I think it's...
So what are the questions that you ask in that evaluation? Like, what's the matrix of decision-making?
Yeah, I think it certainly jurisdiction matters, right? Am I in Europe? Am I in the United States? Is the action that I want to do with the data actually requiring consent, or can I take the position that I'm doing this in my legitimate business interest, as the GDPR illuminates? This is where I can't underscore enough having a network of other professionals and other people in your role to bounce stuff off of, not just outside counsel. I mean other lawyers, other privacy people, to bounce off them. What are you doing in this particular scenario? Do you think I need consent, or can I use legitimate interest here? I have privacy consultants that I tap, even as someone that purports to know what they're doing about these things. I don't know the answer to everything. This is such a dynamic world that I don't know the answer to everything. So I think in assessing, consent in general, it depends. We had a question come up the other day about our inbound marketing efforts and what level of consent we need when someone downloads a white paper or wants to view a piece of content on our site. And I had to go through this sort of checklist analysis with the person about, well, what do we intend to do with the data? What is the way in which we could obtain consent? And then how does that tie to further email communication with that person? Irrespective of law or regulation, I always try to put myself in the shoes of the data subject or the person receiving the email. If I receive an email that is a marketing email directed at me, and I may not understand why I got it, or I may understand why I got it, but don't really want to receive it anymore, the bottom line at the end of the day is, are you as an organization availing that person of an opt-out? Even if you've obtained their consent to do something, is it very clear to them how to have that activity stopped? And as an organization, it's our duty to honor that choice.
Terrific, Andy. We have just a little bit more time here, unfortunately, because we have a lot of great questions that have come in. Clearly, we're going to need to do a follow-up to this program to handle some of those questions. But this next one, and what I'd like to finish on, is what I bet a lot of people are also struggling with and wondering about how best to handle out there, which is, Camille, in your example with the Instacart, how much information can be gained about consumers out there with the technology? It's just incredible, and it's just rapidly increasing. MK, as a marketer, how do you make decisions about whether in this privacy space we say that there's this line of creepy where the organization knows more about me than I know about myself, or knows more about me than I think they know about me? So how do you personalize to the extent that it's beneficial to the consumer and that they are getting what they want and being contacted in the way they want, but not crossing that line where you're sending a signal to the consumer that's like, whoa, I didn't know you knew that about me. How do you deal with those questions inside the organization? Andy just mentioned always putting yourselves in the shoes of the consumer, which is, of course, is or the data subject, which is a great advice. But what are your other thoughts about that, about how best to use that information and build trust as opposed to, scaring away your customers? Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think this ties back to what I was mentioning earlier about marketers being pulled further along into the customer journey. We used to only be responsible for building trust very quickly at the onset of the engagement so that our sales teams could close new business. But marketers are being pulled much further and deeper into the customer relationship. They are now responsible for things like customer marketing, where they're considering and thinking through the lifetime value of a customer and how can we get repeat or renewed business or expand that business, and think about marketing strategies that help support that type of a growth effort. When I think of this question in the real world for me as a consumer, I think of Amazon. So Amazon is basically the backbone of our household, which I imagine it is for many folks who are on today's call. But it's the way that Amazon uses the data to further enhance and elevate the experience of interacting with them. It's, for example, this year during the holidays, it was easier for me to send gifts to my loved ones and family and friends by using their delivery service, and it was just easier. And so marketers need to really elevate themselves and think about the experience that they are providing with their marketing collateral. Product teams and or companies that are providing services are also going to be thinking about how they use this data to elevate that experience. Once you can elevate the experience and show folks that you are not misleading them, that you are building on that relationship and earning trust throughout that customer life cycle, people will then be more willing to give you more of that intel in exchange for that elevated experience. Amazon, going back to my example, knows so much about my life and my fiance's life because it's the backbone of our household, and we're very happy to give them those data points because they will continuously elevate the experience we have partnering with them. So brands have the same, marketers have the same responsibility to earn that trust and never misuse the data that they have, and always continually elevate the experience for the consumer.
Right. It's a continuous trust or continuous test. Is it what I want or not what I want as a consumer? Am I getting messages and information that enhances that customer experience or detracts from it? Great, that makes a lot of great sense, MK. Thanks so much. And Camille, let's turn to you for the last word on this too. I'm sure you have some thoughts here as well. It's tricky these days. There's so much power available to us, and how do we make those decisions about, again, how to continue that positive, trusting customer relationship as opposed to stepping over the line and using too much data.
So yes, frankly, most companies, if they combine data with both algorithmic intelligence and human intelligence, could, quote, learn more about me than I know about myself. I think many companies are in that position. To MK's point, it's what they do with that and what value they give. And what is most interesting to me about marketing's role lately is it's not, and if we compare that, by the way, to what marketing's role was understood to be about 20 years ago, which could largely be equated with advertising, as in, oh yeah, the marketing department will create that ad and will broadcast out what we think you need. Okay? Flash forward to now, where marketing is in the center of essentially data that lets us see not only how that message was resonating, but I think more interestingly, what customer needs may be unmet through a variety of sources. And that puts us into a product thinking mindset in addition to a communication mindset or a sales mindset or even a customer service mindset, other things that now marketing is doing. For me, the most interesting direction that marketing is going into is product, and it makes perfect sense to me because for me, marketing is markets, and markets are addressable groups of consumers or business needs that are currently undermet or frankly unmet. So just as I'm delighted by what I'm getting from Instacart today, when they come up with, sort of automatic sending of groceries to me based on, however that interaction goes, then my unmet need for even more time will be met. And that, you could think of that as a marketing contribution to the picture, a product contribution, or some combination. And I think that, back to, and maybe wrapping up, the common theme for me, and the common theme in what MK has been saying, is that we are stewards of information, but ultimately the goal is for the sake of the consumer, and for the value we can give to the consumer, which then, of course, translates to profitability, hopefully, for the organization, and what we call customer lifetime value.
Well, that's a perfect place to end, Camille. Thanks so much for that. And, thank you, MK, for joining us on the panel, and Andy for both contributing and moderating the conversation today. It was fascinating. We had huge response and audience, and lots of you online here with us today. So clearly a well-received topic, and I think you guys did a great job at delivering some useful information for folks. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Also wanted to provide a really hearty thank you to Wirewheel for sponsoring the program today for us here at the IEPP, making this virtual education free and available to all of you out there. So thank you, Wirewheel. It's partnerships that the IEPP has with partners like you that keep the privacy community alive and thriving, especially in these challenging times. So really wanted to send out a big thank you. That's if you're watching this webinar live, that Wirewheel logo in the middle there is a live link, and will take you to your homepage if you'd like to learn more about them as an organization. And if you're still in line with us, I'd love for you to click on the link in front of you on the slide and take a very quick survey for us. We've timed it. It literally takes 2 minutes. Lets us know how we're doing here at the IEPP with these privacy education web conferences. And did this program deliver what you expected it to? There's a field in the survey that allows you to tell us what topics and issues you'd like to hear about on future programs, which we look at regularly in order to program. So please click the link in front of you there, go to that quick survey, give us some feedback, let us know how we're doing, and let us know what we can do to serve you well in the future. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, if you're an IEPP Certified Privacy Pro, you have a certification with us, and you register through the website, we're going to automatically grant you 1 CPE credit toward the upkeep of your certification. And if you're listening in and you didn't register through the website, which of course is fine, you can still get that credit by going to the certification tab on our site and filling out a real quick form, and we'll give you that credit. If you're an attorney and you're wondering about continuing legal education credits, they are available in a lot of jurisdictions, but we don't pre-certify these programs. So if you need further information about that, you can contact me. I'm dave@iapp.org. Shoot me a note, and I will do what I can to provide you with materials and information on that. So with that, it was a wonderful program. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today, and hope to see you on another program in the near future. So with that, I'll take us to a program close.